Welcome to the Gridiron Expert. Next up on our team previews, we're going to be looking at the Northwestern Wildcats. And joining us on the channel today to discuss Northwestern is Matthew Shelton. Matthew, welcome to the channel.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, before we get into the position groups for Northwestern, can you tell us your affiliation with the university and then how you got all started with sports media?
Yeah, sure thing. I am currently the managing editor for Wildcat Report, which is Northwestern's Rivals affiliate. I've been writing there for the past, I think this will be year four. Started there when I was a student, and then I've continued there post grad.
All right. Well, so Northwestern's coming off of a season in which they did not quite qualify for a bowl game. In 2023, though, they finished with 8 wins, and that was in the first year of their new coaching regime. So, going into now the third year of this tenure, what is the outside and the external expectation for most of the Northwestern faithful? What are they expecting overall for the team this fall?
I think the expectation, or I think it's more kind of like the aspiration of like kind of the goal for I think the coaching staff and the program is they want to make a bowl game. There's kind of the old card phrase, one's luck, but two's skill. You know, the first season under David Braun for the first kind of two-thirds, he was there as an interim, became the full-time coach. They had a really strong end of that season. Like I said, 8-win campaign, really exciting time in the program, and then a very disappointing season last year. So now it's kind of his tenure is in the balance. You know, it's like, is it going to be are they going to make it back to a bowl game, or is that season going to kind of go down as more of an interim bump type situation? So again, I think the benchmark that they want this season, what they've really put a lot of time in the portal, and other places and development is they want to get back to a bowl game. That's a successful season for them.
And speaking of getting players through the portal, we'll look at the quarterback position. So they got the former SMU quarterback that was the starter in 2023 and began last year as a starter, and then got taken over by Kevin Jennings, and that's Preston Stone. And so he transfers into Northwestern. Is the expectation for him to be the starting quarterback this fall?
It is. David Braun has been very hesitant to name starters in the past. He took the starting quarterback decision to basically, in terms of a public announcement, he announced with the first drive in the first game of the season of both the last two seasons of announcing Ben Bryant as the starting quarterback over Brennan Sullivan, and then Mike Wright initially as the starting quarterback over Jack Louch. I think it's going to be very different this season. He's talked about a little bit of they're looking to name a starter very early in fall camp. And I mean, you kind of alluded to it there. Stone's resume is just head and shoulders above the rest of the room. Jack Louch started the last 10 games for Northwestern last year, finished with a 3-7 record. A lot of variables, but at the end of the day, again, you're just comparing just black and white wins and losses. Louch is 3-7. Stone is 13-3 as a starter at SMU, and kind of got passed up in a situation of basically good compared to great. Of like, it wasn't that Stone looked bad; it was playoff caliber quarterback waiting in the wings. And I think you've also kind of seen some both implied and direct hints at the internal decision in that Lausch is playing baseball this winter and spring. So he's missed some spring practices here and there. Still been there for the majority. I would still say he's the clear cut second string guy. But I think if he thought, no matter what the coaches say, I think if Lausch kind of thought internally that he had a real chance at the starting job, that wouldn't have been a decision that he made, and he would have kept all his chips in on starting that quarterback battle.
Do you think Stone could be one of the better quarterbacks that Northwestern has had since what 2018 maybe 2019?
Yeah, 18 was the last year of Thorson, so absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think Northwestern's scoring offense ranked 128th last year, so not quite at the SMU Rhett Lashley standard. But when you look at Preston Stone's stats from his last year, where he was fully healthy, and he was injured at the end, but he still has a 12 game sample size there. Um, he threw for 3,100 yards and 28 touchdowns. Now, I believe only Clayton Thorson or maybe two or three other quarterbacks have thrown for more yards in a season for Northwestern. And I also believe that a Northwestern quarterback has never thrown for 28 touchdowns in a single season. So if he comes in and replicates what he's shown in the past, he's going to go down as one of the best quarterbacks they've had. And I think there have been, again, a lot of variables in terms of strength of schedule, transfer portal, rise of NIL, you name it. But when you look over the last 6 seasons, basically the post Thorson era of Northwestern, if he was the last time they really had an internal secure candidate coming in as a starter year to year, really, again, providing a sense of stability. Since they've tried to work through the portal, when they've had good quarterback play, full game. When they haven't, it has been 1 to 4 wins and been very inconsistent. And so I think you're seeing from Stone probably more a lot of similarities to Ben Bryant, who came from Cincinnati after a 9-2 season there. Again, Stone went 10-2 at SMU his last healthy season there. A lot of similarities, and Ben Bryant was the majority starter when they went to a bowl game. So I think there's a lot of optimism in that sense of if Stone is back to full health, that they can have reliability and stability at the quarterback position, which has always been. I mean, I don't think that's unique to Northwestern, but once you get that, everything follows. When you don't have that, it doesn't matter. Sometimes it doesn't nearly matter as much of like, hey, you can have the greatest back seven in the world or a great D line or whatever you want, but if you don't have quarterback, then it's really, really hard to win games at this level.
Yeah, really good quarterback play will increase the ceiling for any team. So looking at who Preston Stone most likely will be throwing it to this fall. So in the receiving core, last year's top three, at least in terms of stats, production, are gone. Now, are there pretty high expectations for South Dakota State transfer? Is it Griffin Wild?
Wildy,
Wildy.
I know
Okay.
it's weird. Um, I mean, he was phenomenal at the FCS level for South Dakota State. I think wide receiver is probably the team's biggest question mark, to be honest. They have next, as you said, they have next to no returning FBS production. So they, for on roster, the two players who are probably going to be in the rotation is uh, Ricky Amarazi, who was redshirt his freshman year, was injured last season, but this comment raised a lot of eyebrows. But in terms of his flexibility around the wide receiver room, David Braun compared him to Jeremiah Smith.
Whoa.
So I don't think he'll be that good, but I think when you're making that comparison, that's a sign that they like what they've seen from him so far. And you also have Frank Covey, who had 10 catches last season. But really, they're betting, to your point, they're betting huge that Willie is gonna replicate his FCS success. Because if he doesn't, again, they just don't have proof of concept on roster of guys that have been consistently healthy or consistently successful in the Big Ten level. They need Wildy to come in and be a consistent 1A caliber top receiver. Otherwise, case scenario for them is that Stone can be as great as he wants, offensive line can be as improved as it wants, but no one's going to be open. So they've also to that point they've also said that they don't see wide receiver as a further position of need in the portal. So that is again, it's a vote of confidence in what they have. They don't have a lot of returning FBS production.
See, in this portal era, I think it's at least, somewhat important to like read the tea leaves when it comes like to coaching staffs when they say, like maybe some people will question them or ask them like, do you think we need more in this particular room? Like, do you think we need to increase our production, proven FBS production in the wide receiver room? Do we need to go out and get somebody? And then the coaching staff, in this case, they believe in what they have. So what I mean by reading the tea leaves is like maybe that they're not getting anyone because they actually do feel really confident in this group's floor and ceiling. And as you just said with is it Amarazi? Um
Yes.
6'4", 210. So like, he's got a good frame. So
Yeah, he looks great in practice. It's just a situation of it's just a big bet on a guy that I believe is going to be a redshirt sophomore. Um, Again, like their votes of confidence have been there. It's just a very interesting situation of they've made a lot of moves in the portal, especially by their standards, and a lot of times they are love it. They are really hammering the importance of shoring up the offensive line. They're continually bringing guys in there. They're bringing guys in at other positions of strength that where I thought they already had starting quality players like linebacker. So it's just a really, I would say it's the biggest internal bet on the roster of they have looked over their spring ball and their past body of work and they're saying, we think these guys, we don't care what the stat sheet says, we think these guys can produce. And whether or not they're right is going to dictate the season.
And we'll move to the offense line here in a second. I want to ask one last question about the receiving core. So, do you have any like concerns, worries that they did not get more proven production or immediate help in the portal, or do you believe in like a similar thought process where it's like, well, if the coaching staff is not getting anyone, maybe they do believe they can be really good, and so does that increase your confidence?
I'm going to be kind of hedge my bets and say yes and no. Like I think on one hand, I think Armand Binns, the wide receiver coach, has been very successful in the portal, and I think he's been one of their stronger position coaches. He's gone out and gotten I'm sorry, Cam Johnson. Went out and got Cam Johnson a couple years ago, who's the team's leading receiver. He went out and he got AJ Henning, who's a fantastic addition. So when needed, he's the job of evaluating the room and bringing in talent. So I think that the decision not to do that this year is a similar result of his evaluation and going off of that. However, my concern is even if their evaluation is correct, even if these three top guys are good players, um, I think the depth in the room is just a concern. Covey's had injury problems um, basically throughout his Northwestern career. He missed his whole first season. He missed 4 games last year. Amarazi missed last season. It's just a big bet on all three of those guys staying healthy because again, with even with their lack of experience, they're the top three guys, or not Wildy's lack of experience, but the other two guys. They're their top, probably their top three guys. There's even less experience kind of behind them. Well, Hayden Elegon played in a few games last season, but recorded very few catches. Um, but again, I just think the biggest point of concern for me is definitely wide receiver because even if the evaluation is correct, they still need some good injury luck for that evaluation to continue being correct because the underlying depth of that room might not be ready to contribute this season.
Do you think Drew Wagner could be an explosive player in the receiving core for them?
Yes, actually, it's funny, but it's he was a preferred walk-on flip from Navy last year in the last recruiting cycle, and kind of just a really cool story from I believe he's from Kettle Moraine, which is the same high school that David Braun went to. So originally kind of a cool story, and then really because of a few injuries and the way it shaked out, he really made some great contributions to the team, both in special teams and at wide receiver. He was getting a lot of reps at their open spring practice, so I think he is definitely another guy that has the opportunity to contribute, but he had a great punt return touchdown against Iowa last year. But at the same time, I don't think he's someone that going into a season at this point in his career, you would feel confident with him as one of your three starters.
I see. Well, on the offensive line, so this has been a pretty talented group really the last couple of years. And so they have some transfers going out and then some transfers coming in. So we'll discuss more of the guys coming in. So Xavier Gray transfers in from Liberty. I maybe the right tackle. He might be playing right tackle this year. Is that right?
Yeah, he should be. The two tackles are almost certainly going to be, if they're healthy, it's going to be Caleb Tiernan at left and Xavier Gray at right.
And then Josh Thompson I'm sorry. So Thompson transferred to LSU.
Mm-hmm.
Cooper Lovelace hit the portal as well, and then they brought in Martez Lewis from Minnesota. How does the starting five look like, and what about the depth as well in the offensive line?
Yeah, you also have Evan Berenson coming in from South Dakota State. He was, I believe, second team FCS All American by the AP. So he's another guy with a connection to current offensive coordinator Zach Lujan came from South Dakota State. a year ago. So he's brought that was he was kind of the lead connection there for Wildy and for Beardson, and then they also have their run game coordinator is now at Northwestern, Ryan Olson. He's now there as an assistant offensive line coach. So there's a lot of South Dakota State connections that kind of brought him in. Martez Lewis from Minnesota started for them in 2023, kind of fell out of the rotation in 2024. We'll see what he looks like. I would say basically, I think there are probably four locked starting positions if people are healthy. Like I said, you got the two tackles, you're going to have Jack Bailey at center, and you're going to have Beardson at one of the guards. The other guard position is open, I think, for competition, and that is going to be. I mean, there are probably five different guys that could potentially play that role. I think probably your two leading competitors are Lewis, who's absolutely massive, a mountain of a man, and then Uzomo Radikai, who preserved his red shirt but played in 4 games last year, including Michigan and Ohio State, where he held his own as a true freshman. So I think they'll want to look to continue to give him reps. They're probably the two leaders in that battle, but also got some underlying depth with guys like Nick Herzog, who started week 1 last year before getting injured. Also got Deuce McGuire, Anthony Birsa. They offensive line was a again, I'll just be frank, was basically a structural issue last season. They only had 7 players in the offensive line in spring ball. They're nearly at triple that number heading into next season. I think they're going to have 19 guys in the offensive line room. So they've really gone from basically all hands on deck, scrambling, and even at that point they had a lot of injuries. 9 different players started on the offensive line in 2024. Now they're going in with both, I think, a starting lineup, or at least 4/5 as a starting lineup that they're feeling really positive about as a group that can really set a tone, enable a running game, give Stone time as a less mobile quarterback than Lausch was. Um, but then also, yeah, they're just looking to find that fifth piece. And I think even beyond that, they really like some of their depth pieces from existing players, including also had a younger transfer ad with Talon Chandler, a center from Missouri. He also has a chance to compete at the center spot.
And if I'm not mistaken, it looks like there could be what, four graduates in the starting lineup?
Oh yeah, they're a bunch of grown men. I think the average age is going to be close to 24. You got Tiernan, Bailey, Beardson, Gray. All those guys are in fifth year or more of playing college football. These guys have played a long time. A lot of them have long-standing connections with Bill O'Boyle, the offensive line coach. Um, it's a really experienced group, and I think in terms of the biggest difference from last season is I think the quarterback ceiling is much higher if Stone can deliver on his potential, and I think the offensive line really has a chance to be able to actually dictate terms. I don't. I feel like one of the more national moments of the season was kind of Northwestern's futility versus Washington on the goal line of kick the field goal to go from down 17-2 to down 17-5. Basically, I think the number was they ended up having, I think it's 7 or 8 plays inside the Washington 2 without scoring a touchdown. And a lot of that came down to they just couldn't create separation at the point of attack. They couldn't dictate terms. And a lot of that came from a lack of depth at offensive line or a lack of a starting talent in the first place. And I think their main goal this offseason has been to address that. And I think they've done a pretty good job um, with the sales pitch and support that they have of being able to go out and get some guys that can really make a difference this season.
And I'm sure the running back room is going to appreciate a most likely improved offensive line. Is Cam Porter the guy?
Yeah, Cam is going to definitely be the bell cow back. He's built like a bowling ball. He's the guy that's going to be going between the tackles, getting the hard won runs. He has also kind of had a bit of an injury riddled Northwestern career. He's never really had a full season at full strength where they've been at a competitive level. And I think this is kind of his chance to do that. And with that said, he's had back to back 500 plus yard seasons. So the production's there. They know that Cam can be good, can be reliable. He just needs to be healthy and he needs an offensive line to give him opportunities. And I think they have the opportunity to hit on both of that this season. They'll also have an improved Joseph Hyman, who is incredibly fast, has a true plus speed guy. He's an impact on the return game. They'll be kind of your, I think it's a common phrase, but that's kind of like your thunder and lightning pairing right there. I would say probably, if I had to guess at percentages, I'll say probably like 50% Porter, 35% Hyman, 15% to Caleb Komalafe as the third back.
So we discussed the pass catching group has some questions. What about the tight ends? Do you think is Alex Lyons going to be like the leading guy here, you think?
Well, they're not short on tight ends. They have, at least projected right now, they're going to have 10 of them next season, which is an amount of tight ends. I think
Yeah.
there have been a few different uh, confusing or points of consternation from the fan base in terms of roster construction, especially as as people were thinking that house roster limits were going to go in place, and it was like
Yeah.
you're going to have 105 players, and one out of every 10 guys is going to be a tight end. But it doesn't look like that's going to be as harshly enforced anymore. There's going to be some kind of grandfathering in. But I think the main point of frustration is so you're going to have 10 players in the tight end room next year. And admittedly, four of these guys are newcomers, so it's a little bit of an asterisk. But guess how many receptions for Northwestern those 10 players have?
Oh, and those 10 at the FBS level?
Yeah, for like four Northwestern.
Zero. One.
Hunter Welsing has a catch for 20 yards. So
Yeah,
that's
because
it. So again, so you have that many players and you have that little production. So it has kind of been the biggest red flag frustration point for the fan base for a long time of like, how does the team have this many tight ends and none of them can really produce? But yeah, Lines is a really big body. I think he's 6'6", 250. So he's coming in as probably the likely starter. When you don't have as much production, it's kind of hard to predict the depth from there. Kent McGee was very highly rated recruit. He has an opportunity as more of a pass catching guy than in terms of more of a heavier set, 240 plus, more blocking focused. Guy behind lines is probably one of Chris Petrucci, Lawson Albright, or Hunter Welsing. And again, I think kind of the frustrating thing with the tight ends is that like Zach Lujan's system does use a lot of tight ends.
yeah.
Um, and they have so many of them, and the only two that were really producing at this level, and I think there was still some disappointment in the production, but the only two with any serious experience were Thomas Gordon and Marshall Lang, and they both graduated out. So definitely a position of improvement. Definitely a lot of options to have.
Yeah, so what's interesting, so you're talking about the returning production or the production that Northwestern has had of these 10 guys combined. So here's what I have in my notes. So that's why I wanted to discuss it because I have top four depart in terms of production. A lot of bodies here, quality depth maybe, but production question mark question mark question mark. So yeah.
Maybe a few more question marks.
Yeah. So overall, I guess with the offense is if the pass catching group ends up being pretty good, the offense actually might be decent because there's quality depth. It looks like on the offensive line, they feel pretty confident with their starting group. Preston Stone has probably a higher ceiling than what Northwestern has had at quarterback recently. Cam Porter's a potential bell cow at running back. I mean, there's more to like this year offensively than I think last year.
Much more. I think especially because I think one of the things that really hamstrung the offense down the stretch were injuries in the wide receiver room. Bryce Kurtz really struggled, which was really frustrating for him to not have a fully healthy last season at Northwestern. Same thing. AJ Henning was occasionally limited by injury, and I think that was kind of the issue with. I don't want to say issue, but I think kind of the frustration with Northwestern going to Jack Lausch was that he didn't get a better crack at a starting job just because there was so much uncertainty on the offensive line. There was so much uncertainty or inexperience with wide receivers once Kurtz and or Henning would be unavailable. I think the stat was it's like when Lausch threw for more than 200 yards, they were 3-3. They were a 500 team when he reached pretty much a very basic benchmark of quarterback play. 3-3. We're very competitive early. We're very competitive basically through three quarters with Indiana. They were very competitive through a quarter with Ohio State. Both of those were 200 plus yard games. The problem was, I think, both based on offensive line, receiving talent, and also potentially Lausch's talent as a quarterback. There were four other games where he threw for 110 yards or fewer, and they went 0-4 and lost those games basically by an average of 4 touchdowns. So again, it kind of goes back to like really simple, but when Northwestern gets basic quarterback play, their brand of defense and their style of play has shown they can be 500 bowl game competitive. When they don't, that's when the bottom falls out and they start getting games like 50-6 at Michigan, or I think it was 40-14 at Iowa. Those really big scores of just like the defense just gets left out on the field, they get tired, scoreboard lights up.
Well, speaking of the defense, so moving over to the other side of the football, the defensive line was a rather deep rotation last year. It was a quality unit that gave up only about 130 rushing yards per game. Now Hubbard returns at defensive end after tallying 6 sacks last year. R.J. Pearson, Jalen Pate both graduate, but there's a lot of production behind those two, in Pearson and Pate, that returns. They also added Miguel Jackson, I believe, from Utah State. Do you think the defensive line might be the strength of the team?
It's up there. I mean, I really think three levels of the defense have really strong potential this season. I think you have a chance for. I think the team probably has two serious pro prospects heading into the season. One of which is Tiernan, who I've talked about, who's kind of your prototypical left tackle. The other is Anto Saka, who's coming in as a defensive end. He's really shown incredible speed that really pops. You know, when you watch Saka when he's healthy play for Northwestern, you know, he pops off the screen. He just is moving at a different speed than everyone else, and I think this is the year where he's really put in the time of he is bulked up to the point where he has the opportunity to not just be a pass rush specialist, of he can be on the field more and more often, which I think can really elevate the ceiling of the defensive line. They're also getting Richie Haggerty back, who is a veteran defensive end who missed last year almost completely with an injury. Again, that was another guy who's more of a pass rush specialist. But defensive line has consistently been their strength the past 2 years. Position coach there is Christian Smith, another South Dakota State guy. He was, I think, he was a finalist for their head coaching job. I think he's a really, really great up and coming coach. That unit has been awesome. Braun, the head coach, also has D line coaching experience. They've always been great. I think the only I don't know if nitpick or red flag's the right word, but they're very again, I think you have a lot of incredibly quick and talented players up front, but they're not very big. They didn't have anyone on the spring roster listed over 300 pounds. And you got plenty of guys in the mid to high 290s. I'm sure they'll bulk up come the season, but they don't have as many of the guys like RJ Pearson or whoever. They don't have as many traditional defensive tackles, nose tackle guys. They're definitely more focused on being lighter and quicker, which I think can be successful against a lot of opponents. But there also have been some games, like I think you saw it at Iowa last year for them, saw it at Michigan, where there are some Big Ten teams that still like to go hat on you. And that might be a situation they have pop up sometimes that might be more of a difficulty to adjust because they might just not have the size in their personnel.
So in the linebacking unit, so what is the seal? What's the floor and ceiling for this group? Because I know they lose some production here, but their top guy is back.
Yeah, Mac Uline is the franchise Mike linebacker. He is the latest in the long line of Northwestern linebackers.
Former
He was
four-star.
no, yeah, I was going to say he's number one player in Illinois that year. He had, I believe had 84 tackles last season. If he's healthy, he's going to start every game, play every snap. You know, again, he is the rock on which they'll build their church. The spot next to him is actually going to be probably a 2 to 3 man race between Braden Bruss, who kind of played limited last year, only had 12 tackles, but the staff really seems to like. He was playing snaps at the spring practice next to Uline. Then you have two transfers with a lot of experience. You have Yanni Karloftis coming in after 250 plus tackle seasons at Purdue. And then you also have Jack Sadowski coming in after 225 plus tackle seasons at Iowa State. So honestly, again, I feel like with each defensive position group you go through, I'm going to say like this might be the best group they have on the team. But I really think the ceiling of the linebackers, it's hard to rank in Northwestern history because there have been some great groups of like you are just 2 years departed from Gallagher and Mueller who were unbelievable. But they have a chance to really put themselves close to that echelon if they get one of Bruss Karlaftis or Sadowski to hit as that second and third linebacker. It can they can really have a really excellent second level presence.
In the defensive secondary, so three of the top four depart, but it looks like corner is settled because Josh returns at one spot, and then I assume Fresno State transfer Fred Davis is going to play opposite him.
Yes, I think Fred Davis is from Jacksonville State, but yes.
Oh, okay.
Um, yes, I think currently the mock-up right now is you'll have
Yeah.
Fussell at one corner and Davis at the other, and then probably Michigan State transfer Dylan Tatum is going to play nickel. And I think this is another area where they really like the depth in the room because even behind them you have Evan Smith who started the season at corner last year before eventually losing the position battle to Fussell, who was really excellent young player. Then you have an experienced Davis, and then behind them you'll also have Ore Adai, who is supposed to be the second corner across from Theron Johnson last year. That ended up being the Fussell Smith battle. He unfortunately suffered an injury in fall camp and missed the season. He'll be back and competing for that role. Their secondary is going to be at a very high level, and that includes safeties where Damon Walters, I mean, I think other than maybe Saka, if he lives up to his potential, Damon Walters at safety might be the best player. Or should say Saka and Uline. Damon Walters might be the best player on their defense. They came into the season with two very experienced players there, Devin Turner and Coco Azuma, and injuries gave Walters a shot, and basically the staff couldn't take him off the field. He went in and they were just like, this is just, he played at such a level for them that basically took the choice out of their hands. And they ended up having to make Walters the starter and rotating Azuma and Turner together. So he's going to be back. And then you also probably have Robert Fitzgerald stepping up as the safety opposite him.
So this defense, like you said, each position group has a lot of upside here and a lot of reason to be excited. So ultimately, what do you think the ceiling is for the Wildcats in 2025 when you look at their schedule? And I would say it's probably, yeah, I would say it's probably a little bit more manageable than it was last year. Um, but it's still difficult. You still have road games against Penn State, Tulane to start the season, Penn State, Nebraska, USC, Illinois, hosting Purdue, Michigan, Minnesota. Is there, you think it's a higher ceiling this year?
I do. I think, yeah, the Michigan, Minnesota, those will be at Wrigley Field. The true home games on the lake will be Oregon, UCLA, ULM, and Purdue. Western Illinois, too. Um, Yeah, I mean, I think if you talk about absolute ceiling and like truest sense of the word of like Stone comes in and absolutely lives up to the top of the hype, he comes in, puts together an NFL quality season. I think it's probably 8-4, 8-4, maybe 9-3 if you want to get really crazy. I think my even-handed prediction is probably again maybe this leans a little optimistic, but it's 6-6. I just think for them at this level with the new Big Ten for them, you're going to play two playoff teams. That's pretty much the guarantee. You have to be frank, you're probably walking into the season with two losses of unless there's a divine intervention, you're not beating Oregon, you're not beating Penn State. And then a tier below that, you have two other teams that are probably coming into the season wanting to be playoff teams in Michigan and Illinois. And so that's 4 games. And then you're also road at Nebraska, at USC. Those are two teams that want to be in bowl games. So I think those probably going into the season, those are probably my six. Again, if I'm marking it down at 6-6, those are probably my six losses. Um, but again, in terms of ceiling, if Stone delivers, the offensive line clicks, the wide receiver room is as dependable and talented as they hope it can be. The running backs stay healthy and the defense gels, then I think they can go 8-4. Otherwise, like I said, I think the aspiration for a realistic approach is that they should want to get to a bowl game.
And like, if you want to throw in another team that's vying for a playoff spot, obviously their chances are much slimmer. But Tulane for the G5. So you know,
Absolutely. That is a administrative frustration of you talk about a season that has so much hanging in the balance of like, again, frankly, if you look at the production last year of like you had the 128th scoring offense with a first year offensive coordinator. You look into this season of like if it does not click and it's not a bowl game, there is going to be seriously critical assessment of assistant coaches or potentially even head coach as the new stadium opens next season. So to have those being the stakes, and because Northwestern once set a home and home with Tulane back in the 2010s, and COVID canceled the 2020 home game at Northwestern, but they kept the 2025 date. So a Big Ten school is just playing at Tulane. That's the end of the series, and they didn't buy out of the game. It's pretty frustrating wherever Northwestern fans or people want to fall along that spectrum. Um, just from an administrative perspective, it's not a game that should be happening as a standalone. Um, but it's a good initial test, and I think it'll tell you a lot about this team. If they can go in and beat what has been very well coached, as you said, G5 playoff aspirations, if they can go in and win that game, that's a tone setter. That's a team with full potential. If they go down to New Orleans and they lose, they've are the safety blanket or the security blanket is pretty much already gone, and it's now you've got to play your absolute best football the rest of the season if you want to stay alive for bowl eligibility.
and if they find a way to beat the Green Wave on the road, I mean, 4-1 start is not out of the question at all.
Yeah, I think it really depends on how good UCLA is with Nico at quarterback. That's definitely makes that game a little tougher. But for sure, they can build a really good foundation. And I think I mean that was the struggle for them last year is because they dropped the double OT game at Duke.
Yeah.
That basically swung their chances at bowl eligibility. Um, if they did that, I forget how the exact breakdown on academic progress went, but they might have. I think they might have been able to be a bowl team had they beaten Duke. Um, but yeah, again, just like Northwestern, with the way the Big Ten schedule works now, where again you're playing Nebraska, USC, Michigan back to back to back. You're playing multiple playoff teams. They have to get off to a good start.
Well, Matthew, really good job previewing Northwestern. We loved having you on the channel, and we'll look to have you back on again this time next year.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.